Starting at 3:45 in the early morning hours, Ukrainian operators at concealed facilities near Odessa were making final preparations for a critical assault. Their target? Saki Airbase, located 190 miles away on the Crimean Peninsula, home to Russia's 43rd Naval Attack Aviation Regiment of the Black Sea Fleet, where Su-24 bombers and Su-30 fighters sat waiting. More than just a military installation, Saki represented a crucial pillar supporting Russia's aerial dominance over Crimea. Within the hour, Ukraine would ensure those Russian warplanes never left the ground. And here's what struck me as particularly clever. The instrument of their destruction would be nothing more than affordable, homemade UAVs, hardly the cutting-edge weaponry one might expect for such an operation. At precisely 3:52, the control crew commander issues the launch order for the first AN-196 Lyut from a camouflaged runway. The drone accelerated from 50 miles per hour to 110 miles per hour as it climbed into the darkness. Every 30 seconds, the remaining 24 aircraft followed suit, climbing skyward toward the southeast, where Russian fighters sat parked and vulnerable. Launch complete, the control teams vanished into the night along shadowy back roads, killing all lights and activating thermal countermeasures. They knew what was coming. The moment Russian systems detected these anomalies, artillery and missiles would rain down on that launch site within minutes. Meanwhile, the 25 AN-196 Lyuts descended to just 240 feet above the Black Sea, racing southeast like tiny black specks beneath the entire Crimean air defense umbrella. On Russian radar, only faint blips flickered before vanishing near the horizon's edge. That anomaly didn't escape the Russian watch crew. Too sluggish for cruise missiles, too low for fighter jets, with a radar signature far too small to confirm immediately. Seconds later, the warning signal rocketed into Crimea's defensive network. Target information was rushed to the S-400 Triumph system positioned in Sevastopol, Russia's supposedly impenetrable long-range shield. In theory, the system was nearly unbreakable. The 91N6E Big Bird radar could hunt targets from extreme distances. The 92N6E fire control radar could track multiple contacts simultaneously. Interceptors could reach 300 miles out, with the 48N6E3 missiles capable of striking targets 150 miles away at altitudes exceeding 100,000 feet. Russian commanders believed Ukrainian drones should never survive past Crimea's outer edge. But real combat doesn't follow manufacturer specs. It obeys the Earth's curvature, ground clutter, sea reflections, and human reaction times. Flying at only 240 feet above the water, those Lyuts transform the radar horizon itself into a shield. Ground-based radars excel when scanning upward. They struggle hunting small targets skimming the surface. Every wave, every low ridge, every coastal structure, every reflected signal transforms a radar display into visual chaos. It's like a soldier searching the sky for aircraft, while the genuine threat crawls beneath his feet. The S-400's X-band fire control radar, operating in the 8 to 12 GHz range, dominates at tracking high-altitude fighters. But here's the problem. The 25 Lyuts weren't approaching as one block. They split into multiple attack vectors, forcing Russian systems to distinguish genuine UAV signals from clutter and false returns. Every second of uncertainty compressed the distance between the formation and Saki. The Buk M3 formed the next defensive layer, designed to intercept medium-range threats and shield the S-400 itself from breakthroughs. Its 9S36 radar handled low flyers. The 9M317M missile reached out 40 miles. But time became the enemy. From signal acquisition to launcher firing, Russian crews needed at least 6 seconds. Receive radar data, identify the target, transfer coordinates, rotate the launcher, issue the firing order. At 110 miles per hour, those 6 seconds meant covering 1.2 miles. If the Book M3 acquired targets only when they were dangerously close, the response window practically sealed shut. Missiles still had range, radars still functioned. Combat crews remained at their stations, but everything unfolded too close, too low, and too fast for the system to operate as designed. That was Ukraine's entire strategy. They simply needed to create a scenario where a few-second delay shattered the entire defensive chain in front of Saki. And once that moment arrived, everything spiraled beyond recovery. At 4:48 local time, the first 8 AN-196 Lyuts penetrated the final defensive layer in western Crimea and tore straight into the radar zone, protecting Saki's approaches. The initial explosions consumed the air defense position near Sevastopol. The 9-2N6E fire control radar, command vehicle, and surrounding equipment vanished inside columns of fire. A system engineered to command skies hundreds of miles away had just been struck at its absolute weakest point, the final miles before the target. Once the S-400's vital component fell, the remaining Lyuts pivoted toward their secondary objective, the Su-24 and Su-30 parking apron at Saki. These aircraft maintained Russian pressure across the Black Sea and threatened Ukraine's southern defensive lines. Motionless on concrete, however, they transformed into nothing more than fuel-filled metal containers, packed with ammunition and electronics, impossible to conceal from electro-optical sensors. Within minutes, the parking area erupted in flame. Fuel tankers, maintenance gear, and auxiliary structures around the jets exploded in cascading reactions. For Ukraine, this represented far more than striking a handful of aircraft. It meant crippling Russia's capacity for sustained aerial operations across the entire Crimean sector. Yet this was only the strike's opening phase. By 4:52 local time, as black smoke still climbed from the S-400 site, the next wave of Lyuts drove deeper. Russian Buk M3 crews attempted filling the void the S-400 had left behind. 9 M317M missiles launched and screamed into the low sky at supersonic velocity. But now the issue shifted. Speed wasn't the question anymore. It was whether sufficient time remained to lock onto actual targets. The Ukrainian formation didn't follow a single approach corridor. They fractured into multiple small vectors, forcing Russian systems to constantly switch tracks, reclassify signals, and reassign priorities. Some signatures appeared and dissolved behind terrain masking. Others flickered into view for seconds before dropping close to the surface. For Russian operators, every hesitation allowed another Lyut to advance. Buk M3 fired relentlessly. 9 M317M missiles dove into the low airspace at Mach 3.8, proximity fuses set to detonate within 15 feet. But closing distance alone wouldn't suffice. 4 missiles flashed past the formation but failed, generating fragment clouds dense enough to shred the UAVs. 2 others fell victim to sea reflections, low terrain, smoke from the freshly struck S-400 site, and metal structures surrounding the airfield. Buk M3 continued unleashing fire, yet every shot resembled hurling spears into shifting fog. To be frank, the mathematics here tell a sobering story about how precision systems sometimes fail against distributed threats. Meanwhile, the AN-196 Lyut's thermal sensors painted Saki in completely different terms. Against the frigid pre-dawn darkness, every heat source stood out sharply. Fuel tankers, recently operated engines, electrical equipment clusters, maintenance zones, and the parked Su-24s and Su-30s. The UAVs selected targets methodically. One struck the fuel truck zone. Another rammed into a maintenance cluster. The next batch aimed straight at the Su-24 and Su-30 rows, where tight parking meant single explosions would trigger multiple secondary fires. When Liut warheads detonated, flame swept across the apron like an orange tsunami. Fuel ignited. Wreckage tore across the runway. One Su-24 caught fire along its fuselage. One Su-30 was pierced near the wing. Surrounding ground vehicles continued detonating, each small fire point igniting into spreading walls of flame. By 4:57 local time, Saki had transformed into an inferno. Book M3 had fired intensively, but brought down only 12 of the formation. The remaining 13 pierced through the final defensive layer and found their marks. For Ukraine, that sufficed. They didn't require destroying Crimea's entire air defense network, only making it a few seconds slower than battlefield reality. Those few seconds ignited Saki. Sometimes what defeats air defense isn't superior technology. It's sheer volume, tempo, and overwhelming simultaneous pressure. Following the S-400 hit near Sevastopol, Russia recognized a critical gap had opened in western Crimea's protective shield. At 4:55 local time, every remaining system along the Saki approach vector received orders to fire at maximum capacity. Book M3 held the intermediate intercept layer. Pole 21 began smothering satellite signals and control channels with jamming. In the innermost perimeter, two S-38 Derivatsiya systems rotated their 57mm cannon barrels toward the low-altitude flight path, preparing to construct dense fire curtains against any intruder. On operational maps, it still appeared formidable, a terrifying air defense network. In reality, that network had just lost its primary sensor and faced a challenge it wasn't constructed to handle easily. Too many small targets simultaneously. The AN-196 Liuts didn't surge forward as a unified formation. They fractured into multiple small groups, approaching from different bearings, sometimes dispersing, sometimes crossing, sometimes merging back together. On Russian screens, the formation no longer registered as 25 discrete contacts. It looked like signals hemorrhaging through multiple breaches simultaneously. Detection wasn't the challenge anymore. Determining which UAV posed greatest threat, which demanded priority firing, which was merely bait, and which raced directly toward the aircraft parking area, became the anguish. As one track formed, the formation shifted angle. As one group received priority, another slipped through a gap. The fire control computer wasn't overwhelmed by a single overpowering target. It was dragged into countless simultaneous small decisions. Desperate, the Pole 21 system intensified its jamming assault, attempting to suffocate UAV navigation and communication signals. But the Luts didn't depend on a single control source. They maintained capability through inertial navigation, pre-programmed routes, and terminal phase self-correction. Ironically, the heaviest jamming zones unintentionally highlighted what Russia fought hardest to shield. Where Pole 21 interference peaked, often corresponded exactly with air defense positions, fuel caches, command vehicles, or active aircraft zones. Each detection, classification, targeting, firing cycle demanded time. But the Lut formation refused to wait for Russian systems to complete those calculations. Every passing second brought them nearer Saki, forcing air defense crews to accelerate firing, rush target selection, and tolerate larger error margins. When Book M3 focused on one group, another shifted direction. When two S-38 Derivatia locked down one fire corridor, UAVs behind spread outward. When radar attempted redistribution, the formation crossed paths again, forcing recalculation from scratch. This wasn't yet the attack's climactic moment. It was the instant Russian air defense approached its absolute limit. Before the final Liuts rushed into the Su-24 and Su-30 parking zone, the defensive network protecting Saki had been compelled to process too many vectors, too many signals, and too many decisions simultaneously. And in contemporary warfare, occasionally making an adversary a few seconds slower proves sufficient to transform a heavily fortified base into a target incapable of self-preservation. At 5:02 local time, with AN-196 Liut groups still 14 miles from Saki's main fuel depot, Russian air defense unleashed everything remaining. Russian crews started grasping why Ukrainian UAVs had become such an obsession. The S-400 immediately fired 8-9 M96E missiles, downing 8 Liuts in the opening volley, a perfect interception score. Book M3 followed with 8-9 M317M missiles, destroying 7 more. When Pole 21 cranked jamming to maximum, 4 UAVs drifted from formation, abandoned their optimal approach path, and got removed from the final strike phase. In the innermost ring, 2 S-38 Derivatia systems poured 57mm fire into the low airspace, generating red tracers across the flight path and eliminating 4 additional Liuts before they could close on the base. Headquarters reports showed numbers that looked nearly miraculous. Russia had intercepted the overwhelming majority of the UAV formation. Each defensive tier had progressively eliminated Ukraine's drones. But warfare doesn't conclude on a statistics board. Following all those missile salvos, electronic saturation, and dense fire curtains, sufficient Liuts still broke through the defensive perimeter and raced straight toward Saki's primary fuel depot zone. That's what rendered the strike so devastating. If the aircraft parking area represented visible Russian air power, the fuel depot sustained that power's survival. The Su-24s might still sit intact on the runway. The Su-30s might avoid direct destruction. But if the fuel depot, distribution lines, refueling trucks, and supply station got hit, every remaining aircraft would merely become decoration. At 5:04 local time, 6 surviving Liuts rushed into the tank zone and fuel supply routes from multiple angles. Initial explosions tore through concrete, launched ground vehicles skyward, and ruptured fuel lines. Seconds later, dispersed fire points merged into one continuous flame strip. Fuel erupted first, followed by technical vehicles, pump installations, distribution station, and auxiliary storage surrounding the depot. Fire didn't burst from a single location. It appeared simultaneously across multiple zones, making it impossible for Russian firefighters to determine which sector required immediate priority. At 5:06 hours local time, the next Liut wave struck refueling vehicle areas and support infrastructure near the depot. Shockwaves tore across shelters, blasted open metal doors,